catalog that Stax uses, right, for the Carnegie Library. And then
Yep.
I actually submitted my music to it because I was so excited. And then I just started following everything Kelly was doing. And so I'm very lucky to get to work with her now, and we're lucky to have her. So I'll let her introduce the work that she's done prior to where she is now and teach us a little something about product management. I'm going to keep letting people in. So if you need anything from me, just, DM.
Connie Love, you have a request in chat.
Oh, excellent. What is this request? Hit record. Oh, yes, I did. It is now recording to the cloud. No,
That's how I do it.
wrong. Should I not record it to the cloud? I'm going to stop recording it and record it to the computer. No, I'm good. Okay, excellent. All right. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking now.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Shawnee. Hi, everybody. Like Shawnee said, my name is Kelly. I am product manager at Zoobean with Shawnee. It's a startup that works with libraries, schools, and companies to help people build cultures of reading. And this is actually my first official PM role. I've been there since August, so just over half a year. But before that, I was CEO of another startup called Rabble for about 6 years. And so in some ways, I'm real new to product management, and I'll be transparent about like where my gaps are and what I don't know. But there are also elements of this that I've been doing for kind of a long time at this point. So, well, if you can call 6 or 7 years a long time, more than half a decade, that feels long to me. So I'm actually super excited to do a workshop at this stage because I'm learning a ton of new stuff and sort of at this new phase in my career. And I'm excited about the field, and I'm excited about the potential to help other more different kinds of people join it. So a huge thank you to Women in Tech for inviting me to do this, and to Shawnee for hosting, being an awesome human to work with. And to all of you for being here. Thank you. So what we're going to do tonight is I kind of chunked this up into 4 pieces. I'll start off just with big picture stuff. So kind of a basic definition of what product management actually is and kind of a look at it as sort of an industry. And then I'll talk a little bit about my field just to give you an example of like how you might get into a role like this. And then I'll spend most of the time that I sort of talk at you actually talking about responsibilities and skills. So like getting into the meat of what it actually means to be a product manager. And at that point, I'm gonna stop and pause for questions. If you all want to interrupt me as I go, that's cool too, but just know like when we get to the end of 3, I will for sure stop and we can open stuff up to discussion. And then this last piece is I put together sort of a mini portfolio sort of designed for the folks in the Women in Tech bootcamp that anybody can use. I kind of misadvertised it as usability testing and user interviews. I felt like that ended up being a little too complicated. So I dialed it back, but I've got some resources for you if you're like super jazzed about usability testing, and we can talk about that too. Big caveat here is that I am in digital work. I work in like software as a service kind of stuff. So not really talking about physical products, but a lot of the sort of process stuff that I talk about could apply to roles like that. But I think this will be most useful for people hoping to get into a more digital tech space. Okay, so let us start. Big picture stuff. There is this truism that every product management role is different. I think, that's probably at least partially true. But ultimately, being a product manager is really just about helping an organization build great products, however it takes, whatever it takes to do that. And I think there are 2 critical pieces to actually be able to do that. So I grabbed 2 different definitions that I like that I think emphasize those 2 different elements. So this first one is from Atlassian. They're the people who build Jira. If anybody's ever used that for a project management tool, they have some resources about product management on their site. And the part of this definition that I kind of pull out for you here is that product managers advocate for customers within their organizations and make sure the voice of the market or the voice of the customer is heard. So you'll hear product managers sometimes described as like the voice of the customer. And I think it's important to kind of flag here that this isn't just about like understanding customer needs, but it's also about translating those for your team so that they can understand them too. So this is kind of my first big critical piece of the two. And then next, this is from 280 Group. They're like, I don't know, a PM credentialing kind of organization. They have a lot of resources online, but I think many of them you have to pay for. But this definition, what I've highlighted is that product managers work with all of the corresponding groups inside and outside of the company to build products. And so to me, this is the other sort of crucial aspect. A lot of what I do is about getting our team to work together effectively. And if you're not hearing like what sales is saying, what customer service is saying, or what business is saying, then you are working in a silo and you are not going to be that likely to succeed. One of our founders told me once that you're the glue that holds us together. So you have to be kind of sticky and attached to things. So this doesn't necessarily give you a great idea of what a PM actually does. We'll get into that in a few minutes, but hopefully it gives you sort of a baseline and tips you off to a couple things. One, that PMs tend to have a lot of responsibility for making products successful, and they also work in a really collaborative way. And if we zoom out to kind of look at the product management industry as a whole, we can talk about good things and bad things. So there are good things, and I will start with money. This is the base salary in Allegheny County for a PM, according to Indeed. 106 is national, 86K in Allegheny County. To be totally transparent, I will tell you that in my first PM role, coming into it with this 5 or 6 years of experience as an entrepreneur, I landed kind of right in the middle of these two. Other good stuff. You really have the chance to make an impact in this role. It's a role that is like super visible and you have a lot of responsibility and you can really make a difference in an organization. So if that's something that matters to you, this is an awesome kind of role to have. There are also multiple entry points into this as a career. So I'll share more about this in a minute, but I don't have a tech or a business background. I'm a musician originally, and yet here I am. So I think there are lots of different ways to get into this field. And I'm happy to kind of talk through that with folks if that's something that people are curious about. There's also a lot of opportunity for flexible growth. So because you're so visible and you have a lot of responsibility, you might go on to, become VP of product or found your own company or become a CEO. So I think there are lots of ways to really like build a meaningful career from product management. And also the field is growing. There's a lot of research that shows that having a good product manager makes companies more successful. And I think people are kind of noticing that and hiring more product managers. And I have a link here to this study where I pulled some of these ideas from. If you go here, I think you need to give them an email, but you can grab that study and it'll kind of walk you through some of these ideas in more depth. There's also bad stuff though, of course, as there is with everything. The field is 73% male, 63% male. Get these numbers right, 73% white. This is from a company called Zoobean who looks at census data to pull out these demographics in fields. And if you check out this article, another thing you will see there is that you will make less in this field if you are not a white guy. And I don't think any of that is particularly surprising to most of the folks in this room. And it's not surprising given that it's a field in tech, but it's just something to know. I think we all know, what it can be like to exist in a role like this, where white guys are the sort of dominant person in those roles. Other bad stuff. So I said there are lots of ways to get in. That doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to get in. There are lots of PM roles at larger companies in Pittsburgh, like UPMC, where if you don't check all of their corporate boxes, they're going to look right over you. So I think a lot of figuring out your way in is figuring out what kinds of companies to target, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. There are lots of people in this field with MBAs from fancy business schools. So I think if you want to get in, you've got a plan to get in and have like a path that you're on to get into the field. Second bad thing, work can be demanding and stressful. I have a lot of responsibility and my days are very full and sometimes it's a little stressful. I kind of thrive on that for the most part. But if that's something that does not excite you, might want to flag that. And the last thing I have here is demands extreme sociability. So today, Shawnee knows in stand-up, I said, I have 8 meetings today. I'm not sure how that happened, but some days are like that for me. And again, that's something I generally thrive on, but even for me, sometimes at the end of a day of 8 meetings, I'm a little over it. So if you're the kind of person who loves a lot of interaction, that's great for you. But just know, like, you will be talking to people a lot in a product management role. So takeaways from this good, bad stuff, I hope, are basically that the job's demanding, but it can be rewarding if it's a really good match for your personality and your strengths. And I think that's particularly important in a role like this. So I think that's something to kind of assess for yourself. And again, like I said a second ago, I think while it's not necessarily easy to get into, it is something that you can sort of build skills for over the long term and work your way towards. So, whoops, click, there we go. Oh no, there we go. So I'll talk about how I did that, how I got into product management. Like I said, I don't have a tech degree. I don't have a business degree. I don't have any education in either of those fields. Everything I've done as both a product manager and an entrepreneur, I have learned while I was doing it. I have made it up as I've gone along, which I think honestly anybody who is honest about most things in life will tell you is what they do too. My background is as a musician and a historian. I'm a classically trained pianist. I have a PhD in musicology. I went to school for a long time to become a music historian. And my transition into tech actually started while I was still working on my dissertation in the academy. I got a fellowship that put me at a public library that was working on digital collections. And ultimately what came out of that is that I co-founded this startup called Rabble, and worked there for 5 years as CEO. And I'll link, I've got some links here. I think, Shawnee, everybody has these slides, right? Or will have access to these slides. Awesome. So you can check all these things out. Just tell you kind of like a little bit about what I've done. Rabble is a company, it builds a platform called MusicCat that is open source and that public libraries use to build local music collections. And so that first link is to our site. That second link is to Pittsburgh's particular collection, which again, Shawnee is in. So that can be your fun post-workshop activity, is go find her band and Stacks and check it out. It's awesome. And so in the 5+ years that I was at Rabble, we were always a really small team, so a handful or fewer people, and I did everything there. I taught myself how to code. A lot of my code is still running in that platform. I taught myself how to manage other developers. I did all of our customer support. I did all of our sales. I really managed all of the nuts and bolts of running a business, from like contract renewals to taxes to whatever it is. I did it. And that was great. I learned so much, and I got to work with a lot of amazing people and musicians and librarians, and I loved it. But for a lot of reasons, it became time for me to move on to the next thing. And so in 2019, when I decided it was time to do that, at that point, I didn't even know what product management was. So if that is you, like, it's cool. It's not like a household term, really. But a couple people kind of tipped me onto it, and I started to realize that the time I'd spent on customer service, on dev, on all the different parts of the business actually equipped me pretty well to be a product manager. And so the more I learned about it, the more serious I got about like setting my sights on getting a PM job. And I will skip the agonizing details of my job search, part of which took place during a global pandemic. I'm sure some of you can relate. But in the end, I reached out to Zoobean CEO directly and said, I want to work for you. And I had a series of conversations with him and with the CTO, and we kind of just like made up the role together. They weren't hiring for a PM. They just thought they liked me and that I might be able to help them. And here I am. So this next link is a link to Zoobean's platform, Beanstalk. I guess I have this thing for companies that like name themselves one thing and then name their platforms another thing, and everyone is super confused for the rest of time. But I think the sort of takeaway from my path is that it's really important to find the right kind of company for your first role. For me, it was all about, I realized eventually I wasted a lot of time applying to corporate PM jobs. And I realized finally I needed to target a smaller startup like the one I'd been at in a similar market so that the folks there could actually see the work I'd already done and understand the value that I had created there. So if you're thinking about like how you want to get in, like you have to be able to tell that story and you have to find the right people to tell it to. Okay. So we'll get into the longer part, responsibilities and skills. I recently wrote a position description of my role because like I said, I kind of came in, we didn't know what I was doing. And my CEO just asked me to do this a month or so ago, and I'm sharing it with you all. It's not a role we're hiring for because it's my role, but just to be super transparent, like this is it. This is the role I wrote. It's also has changed already since then, but we'll go with this for now. You don't have to read this whole list. I'm going to kind of walk through it. But so the context here is a startup that's about 25 full-time people. It's grown a lot recently. So they did pretty well when COVID hit, as a lot of sort of like digital education tech type things did. And while that is sort of, you know, you can say what you will about it, I have lots of complicated feelings about it. That's just where the company is at. They've grown, but are still small. And so I think knowing that these responsibilities are kind of defined by the stage that Zoobean is in. So let's walk through these. The first one here is helping set, manage, and execute our product roadmap. Sometimes in product management, you might hear this referred to as portfolio management. So it's really the process of prioritizing what we're going to build, when we're going to build it, allocating resources to that, and helping kind of set design and dev work plans at a high level, planning launches, and just helping make sure that everybody can execute on all of that. So this is one pretty big process that I manage with input and direction from the other product leads. This screenshot is of our actual roadmap. It's in Asana, which is where I manage it. And it's sort of like the thing that I own, and that we communicate out to the rest of the team with it so that they know what's coming up. And then 2 is develop and manage a new product development process from ideation through execution and external communication. So that first one was the portfolio process, lots of different projects, managing them as a portfolio. This is how you make one new thing. So this looks really nice and linear and straightforward. It's not that simple. And this is really a work in progress. This didn't exist at all before I started. And the thing I'll say here too is I think it's good for some parts of this to be linear, but something really important that happens in product management is, or in product development really, is iteration. And so I think what we're moving towards is taking some pieces of this and kind of chunking them off into little cycles. So kind of like this, especially at the beginning, when we've got a new idea and, you know, we think it might be good, but like, we don't really know. This is where you want to like talk to users and really assess your ideas and validate before you spend a ton of developer resources building something that nobody wants to use or doesn't actually solve the problem that you think it solves. So just kind of a note about process before I move on from here. These are processes, both of these processes I've developed sort of in collaboration with a bunch of different people on the team, very specifically for Zoobean. And process like development and execution is a really important part of product management. But I think it's just important to keep in mind that process is for people and not the other way around. So it's not enough to just come in with like a process that you love and be like, we're going to use this. You really need to understand the way that your team works and what your team can do and will get on board with, because if you build a process that nobody wants to use and everybody hates, it will fail. And it won't help you. So the whole, yeah, I don't know. That's my rant about processes. Build them to work for your team specifically, and they can kind of look a lot of different ways. Okay, next thing is user testing and interviews. So I run some of this pretty closely with our product designer, especially usability testing. So there's a screenshot here of just some basic wireframes that we ran through usability testing. There are lots of platforms out there that make this pretty easy and relatively cheap to do and quick. So you can kind of throw a test up and get feedback within a couple hours, and it's pretty nice. The other screenshot here is of me making kind of a goofy face talking to one of our school clients who was at home with her very adorable baby. I do a lot of user interviews. I always have at least a couple coming up. Some weeks I have a ton. They're one of my favorite things. Oh no, sorry, I keep touching my trackpad and I shouldn't do that because it's messing me up, but we're good. So user interviews, I do a ton of these, and they are super useful in terms of understanding what our clients need, what makes them tick, why they're motivated to use our stuff. And these can be like pretty intimate and personal, you know, like people bring their babies, and it's good. Okay, next up. Oh man. Yeah, it looks like actually some of these aren't loading. Give me a second. Sorry, everyone. Let's try this again. No, Google. We'll just keep it here so that you can actually see content. This next one is communication, both internal and external. So a couple examples here. One of these, the state of the stack, is a presentation I did for our team retreat with our designer, where we kind of share out what's going on with product to the rest of the team. So those kinds of, I do presentations like kind of frequently for our team specifically. Also a shot here from our blog, which I write for on a semi-regular basis. So I do quite a bit of communication of those sorts. And then let's see, I contribute to the design process. So I am often one of the first folks to see new design ideas, whether they're at sort of a user experience stage and just wireframes, or whether they're, you know, detailed mocks that really get into the interface. And I work really closely with our designer. We go back and forth on ideas all the time. What I have a screenshot of here are requirements. So I write all of our requirements, and this is kind of what we hand to Shani and our other amazing developers and say, like, here's how it should work from kind of a user perspective more than anything. I don't write like detailed technical specs or anything like that. This is pretty high level, and then they take it and run with it and kind of fill in the gaps when there are technical questions. Let's see. I also, on our team, help manage our dev backlogs. This is a screenshot of our web production support board in Asana, where we manage this now. So I do things like run our weekly backlog grooming sessions when devs need to know what they should be working on next. I am one of the people who help them figure that out. So I do a fair amount of just kind of helping manage our dev team and keep them sort of knowing what they should be working on. I'm going to try presenting again and see if we're good here. Ugh. So rude. Okay. I also manage our testing process. So QA, quality assurance, UAT is user acceptance testing. If you don't know those acronyms, I realized I should have written them out and not just dump them in there like that for you. So my apologies. We work on a team where our dev does really a lot of their own quality assurance. So they hand stuff to us in pretty good shape. And then I am the person who writes up testing instructions. We hand that off usually to our client success team. We've got kind of like a cross-functional team of testers who work on our stuff. And then they give us a bunch of feedback that can sometimes be very messy. And that's actually this morning, I spent a bunch of time with Shani and another one of our devs, like combing through that and actually creating list of tasks for developers to do and follow
Thank
up on.
you.
You're welcome. It was a little scary in there this morning, but we managed it. And then last, I have sort of for my current responsibilities that I write and share documentation. This is one of the things that has sort of fallen through the cracks on this particular team. And so we are slowly building up documentation, both kind of internally facing for the dev team. There was certainly a lot of stuff there to begin with, but more so documentation that the dev team writes, or I write with the dev team, and we share out with our client support people so they really understand at a super detailed level exactly how new features work. And then we hope that they read it. And then the last thing that I have here is actually, this is one of my big gaps. Data analysis. So I do a little bit of this, like I get into Google Analytics and poke around, and I sort of have some stuff for our mobile app that I look at, but this is not something that I personally have a background in, and it's not something that I am doing regularly or in any kind of like robust way. There are all these things I want to know, but I don't have a good process for knowing them right now. So this is one of my goals for 2021 is to learn data. And in lieu of me having like anything useful to share with you, I shared this dorky comic about data. So this is just like, flag this for yourself. This is something that I think a lot of people are looking for in a product manager right now, is being able to do data analysis. So and I've got in the resources, I don't know if I mentioned this, but there's some resources too, just at the end of the slide deck. And there is, I think just one link there to like a SQL tutorial that you could take from, specifically from like a product management perspective. So it won't teach you how to create a SQL database, but it will teach you how to approach one as though you were a product manager wanting to know things about how people were using your product. So those are responsibilities. But what I want to do just to kind of wrap up this section is step back and think about like, what are the skills that I need to actually pull all this stuff off on a regular basis? And so this first slide, I'm calling high-level skills. I think some people would call these soft skills. I think that's sort of a bullshit way that we devalue things that are traditionally feminine. These are like difficult skills. The first one is communication. I'm sure that is obvious by now that communication is important in this role. And I just want to say that it goes both ways here. So you need to be able to speak well and write well and express yourself clearly to other people, but you also need to be able to listen and, you know, really understand what customers are telling you, what your team is telling you. You need to be able to read between the lines. Communication, you have to be good at it. The next thing I have here is emotional intelligence. I am sure you will never see this on a job description, but when you are a hub in a company where tons of people are coming to ask questions and you're supposed to be really understanding your users, you have to have emotional intelligence. And for me, that sort of exists on two levels. One is relating to and empathizing with others. So being able to work really effectively with a lot of different kinds of people, people with different personality types, and like genuinely caring about them. And then I think it's also about understanding yourself. So your own capacity to kind of manage the stress of a job like this and manage a bunch of relationships and manage setbacks and criticism. I think both of those are important to surviving here. And then the last thing I have here is systems level or strategic thinking. You know, when you're juggling like a dozen tasks on any given day that need to be done, it can be really easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But being able to see that big picture is ultimately, I think, how you succeed in a role like this. So it's important to understand systems at your company, understand the market as a whole, like just be able to kind of think strategically and on a higher level than the day-to-day. And then last are some skills that are sort of more like nuts and bolts type things. So I mentioned data and analysis of data. Highly recommend like fostering this as a skill for yourself if you want to go into this field. Another thing is having just a basic understand of good design practice and user experience. Some resources at the end, again, if you want to kind of dip your toes into this, that are, I bugged our designer and he shared some stuff with me that he likes. And And then last, I have just being kind of a handy person. So I mentioned, that I've done sales, I've done marketing, I've done customer service. I think all of that, it can be really useful to have as a background. In terms of like actual technical or coding skills here, I have written a bunch of I'm self-taught as a coder. I'm not like a great coder, and I don't code at my current role. But Google, for example, when they interview product managers, they put them through a technical test. So that can vary, I think, from role to role, what expectations are in terms of your technical skills. But I will say, what I do think matters is having sort of a minimum basic understanding of both like modern software architecture, just sort of like knowing how things are built in a general way, and also knowing how developers work. And what that actually looks like. I think having a little bit of that can go a long way in terms of like gaining the respect of the developers on your team and being able to work with them in ways that are productive. And then, yeah, just in general, under handy person, the ability to learn new tools and systems quickly will stand you in good stead. I'm always like trying out a new thing because it might work better for whatever I'm trying to do. So just being able to spin up quickly in new stuff is super useful. And there, I'm going to pause us and we can do some questions before we dig into portfolio stuff, if folks want to do that. Any questions? I've been talking for a long time. It can be hard, so we'll wait for like a good solid 45 seconds.
Hey, Kelly, it's Anil. Thank you first for giving that. And wanted to ask you, like, were there any specific certifications that you came across in your journey as you arrived to this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something I felt really unsure about as I was first learning about this role. So there are a couple kind of standard PM certificates that I do not have at the top of my head, but I do know what they are and I can follow up. I honestly am not super sure. For me, they're not helpful at all. So in a startup setting, nobody cares if you have one of those certificates. Where I think they are helpful is in a corporate setting where people might care. And like, in fact, you'll sometimes see that as like, maybe not necessarily a requirement, or it might be a requirement or a nice to have. But I think just the thing to know there is, if you just have that and you can't check all the other boxes in that corporate space, that's not going to be enough, probably.
Kelly, we have some more questions in the chat. So yeah, bring it.
Are you gonna read them to me?
Yes, I shall do a reading aloud of these
Beautiful.
questions. Okay, so Joy is asking, how has your job changed because of COVID? And do you anticipate that these changes will stay after the pandemic? That's a great question.
That is a great question. So I started my job during the pandemic, so it hasn't necessarily changed, but I can tell you what's changed for our team. Is that we are fully remote right now, which is not super surprising. Our team used to work 3 days in an office and 2 days at home. It seems like people want to go back, but maybe for 2 days instead of 3 days. So that's kind of a work in progress for us. The world is just so weird right now. What I feel really curious about right now is like what the transition back out of this is going to look like. And I don't think I have a good answer for that, honestly. I don't know. I do think, it's definitely like messed with the market in a lot of ways. And like there are some jobs in some spaces, like tech ed, there were a ton of jobs for a while at the beginning of the pandemic. But yeah, I don't want to pretend to be like able to predict markets in that way to tell you what I think is going to happen. But yeah, it's a good question that I don't know I have an awesome answer to.
So we're continuing to adapt.
Yes.
So next question we have is from, is it Amya or Amaya? And we have, hi Kelly, how did you build your skills about product marketing, such as strategy and pricing?
Yeah. For marketing skills, that's another area where I am like, that's a weakness for me, for sure. Marketing. I kind of like don't love marketing. And so I haven't taken the time to be awesome at it. But the ways that I have built those skills at all are mostly by working with people in that field. So at Zoobean in particular, we have an awesome, she was our director of marketing. She's now a contractor, but I work pretty closely with her, and she's like great at SEO and sort of understanding all those things. And so she's kind of my go-to person for that. And then in terms of like market analysis, I'm not sure exactly which angle you're most interested in, but like understanding a market, like where opportunities are, how big a market might be. Again, that's something I like kind of lean on other people to do in my current role. So we will often use our like business analysts to do that, and then just like kind of basic internet research. So I do not necessarily do like tons of like business analytics in my current role. But yeah, there are so many like very specific product management courses that you can like get into online right now. I'm sure if marketing and product marketers are a whole other sort of beast too that exist as product managers. And so if that's something you're interested in, like you can take this kind of role in that direction for sure.
Okay, I'm going to hop to, since the question from Emily is a little bit more about your personal roadmap. So Liliana is talking about budget. So you did not mention the budget as a product manager. Do you manage budget as well, and how?
I don't, not in this role. So I mean, I obviously did when I was CEO. But yeah, it's not something I manage right now. And I've sort of dropped into this role, and it's like, there's just not need right there in our company for me to like get deeply into budget. But I do think like having a basic understanding of how to build a budget and price things is super useful. And so again, this is something I learned from the people I was working around. So a lot of what I learned about how to price, I did from my co-founder at Rabble, who had been in tech and business for a long time and worked with me closely. So yeah, another whole set of fun skills.
Thank you, Kelly.
So we also have a question about what programming languages should I learn to be an attractive PM? So so not necessarily to hire a developer, but if you are going to be a technical product manager, what would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit like where you want to go. Because like old school finance institutions are maybe using different things than, a smaller startup like Zoobean than Twitter. So I think it's kind of like getting an understanding of what your specific goals are and trying to understand like what the tools are that are useful in that field would be where I would start with that. I mean, for me personally, I write JavaScript. I think like, basic things like knowing HTML, Markdown, kind of like the low-hanging fruit can be a good place to start. And there's like steel pan in the background or something. Yeah, sorry, lost my train of thought. But I think JavaScript is awesome too if you're like in kind of a startup field. Lots of people use it, but again, I would tailor it to the direction you're trying to go in.
I feel like JavaScript is always just, if you are getting, whether you're kind of on the product side or kind of starting off in development, it's just it's like a very flexible language. So definitely would suggest that to anybody who's kind of dipping their toes in. A lot of our cohort students are here, and I've kind of shuffled them towards JavaScript as well, just because I think once you learn JavaScript, you can kind of go over to the HTML side and do a lot with that, with like jQuery. And then you can also go to to the back end and actually make really robust applications as well, utilizing a full stack skill set using JavaScript. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And then the last question is from Emily Kane, and then we'll get back to your presentation. But she's asking, I'm curious about your plan to refine your data analysis skills. What's your professional development roadmap this year? Excuse me.
That is an awesome question. So I'm actually in a product management course right now that is through this organization called PDMA, and they are this global organization that has chapters in different cities. There's one in Pittsburgh. I've met the guy who runs the one in Pittsburgh as I was like on my PM networking campaign in my bid to get a job. And so I'm in that course right now, and it's kind of like a general overview. I wanted to do that because Zoobean actually gives us some money to pay for learning. So I spent a good chunk of that money on this course because I was sort of hoping it would fill in gaps for me. It's like kind of doing that. It's from a pretty broad perspective. But that was my first step in terms of my career roadmap this year. Next step is SQL. So that's my plan for data. That's what we use for our database, and our CEO will sometimes have questions about like, how has this new feature impacted usage at this particular place? And I have questions like that too. So I want to be able to answer those questions. So that will be my next project when I finish this course. Will be starting to learn SQL. And actually the link that I shared with you is where I'm going to start in April when I'm done with my PM course.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat right now. And then, actually, nope, just kidding. We have another one. How do you plan your days and weeks for learning?
For learning rather than working? I don't know who asked this question.
Danny asked that. Do you want to elaborate, Danny?
Yeah, can I just do it by voice?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, so just those seems like a lot to add to your toolkit right now, and some big things. And so I'm just wondering, with such a packed schedule that you have for your job, just how are you managing learning and working and all the other things that you do outside of those two domains?
Yeah, I'm bad at this. I am like overly ambitious and I'm not good at saying no to things. So yeah, my husband like encourages me to do less all the time. I personally try to be pretty strict about my working hours. I could easily put in 50 or 60 hours a week. I don't do that. I usually work like more than 40, but not much more. So I think that's key. For me, that's key, like, yes, to be able to do the learning stuff, but also just to like have a good life and be okay. And like be able to come into work and not be a huge stress ball because I have a bajillion things I need to do. So that's the first one, is just being able to walk away, I think, from your day job, and like what gets done in 40 hours gets done in 40 hours. And like sometimes there are exceptions to that, but I don't think that should be the rule, that, you are always putting in like a 50 or 60 hour work week, because I don't think that's healthy. That's the most important piece for me. With the learning stuff, yeah, I don't know. My classes are on Tuesday nights right now. They're from 6 to 8. I am so tired by the end of that. I also have a 5-year-old kid. Yeah, and it's a lot, and especially right now, to be in a Zoom call for 2 hours, like it's awful. But I'm just telling myself at the end of March, it'll be done. And I'll move on to the next thing. And, I honestly haven't figured out how I will schedule the independent learning I want to do after that. But I'll probably like keep blocking a night off a week and just kind of figure out how to make it happen. I do volunteer stuff too. So like I have board meetings and stuff that I will also do in the evenings. Yeah, because I can't say no to things. But I think if you can keep your day job like in its container, that helps.
Okay. So yeah, do you want to keep going with the rest of the presentation?
Sure.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if I can do this again. Ah, amazing. Okay. So mini portfolio project, user interviews. Like I said, I sort of misadvertised this. So again, if you're jazzed about usability testing, there's a list of platforms that have free trials. You can go to town. I kind of worked up a little template for you all that I haven't shared in here, but if you want it, my email is somewhere in these slides. You can let me know. I'd be happy to share it. But I decided to go this route just to keep it simple and straightforward, and also because I think this is one of the things that I am the best at right now. So I've broken this up into just 4 steps, 4 parts that are what, who, how, and so what. So the first one is just decide what you want to learn from user interviews. You can want to learn something like super big and vague. So like, what value does a person get out of my product? That's actually a question that I am like currently answering for our team. Like, why do people actually want to use this? We don't know that. I think we're starting to know that, but we didn't. Or you can get really specific. So like, will this feature actually solve a problem for somebody? Or do they actually have this problem? And I do those too. So as we do new features, a lot of the time I will hop on a call with a client and kind of talk them through what we're thinking about. They'll tell me if it's terrible or they like it or give me new ideas. These are just like, I cannot stress how valuable these are and how much we learn from them. So that's first, just figure out what you want to know. And then who, you need to find people to talk to. And I think if you don't have a product that has users, this can be really hard. But I think you can start with your network. If you're in the bootcamp cohort, you can do this with each other. You can do it with your mom. I think it's good to sort of practice this first before you do it with people in the real world anyways. And so your network can be a good place to go. But what you want to try and find ideally are people who are your quote unquote best users. So the people who love your product and who use it a lot, or at least the people who you think will, if you don't have any of those people. But those are the people you want to talk to. The people who are like, meh, I don't know, like you're not going to get great information from them and it's just going to waste your time. So you want to talk to your best users and better understand like what it is that they love. Okay, and then how? So you have to run your interviews. I put together just a little guide. It's just a Google Doc. It's linked to in there. It's got a couple additional resources with like tips about the basics. It's got a really simple script in there that's kind of based on how I run these at Zoobean. And it's got some other stuff in there. So check that out. But I highly recommend going in with a list of questions and sort of a plan for how you want the conversation to go. And just really trying to keep it a conversation. So trying to connect with folks, make them feel at ease, make them feel like they can share stuff with you. And so what? So this, I think this gets lost for a lot of people. Like you do these and you're like, oh, this really interesting thing happened. But like, it doesn't matter if you don't tell anybody about it. So really, really key is that you take notes during your talk or somebody takes them for you, but you can't just give people like your messy call notes. You have to pull good stuff out of them. So you've got to summarize like your key findings, your takeaways, and then you have to know like what those takeaways are kind of pointing at. So you might not have like obvious next steps after the first 1 or 2 of these, like maybe your next step is I just need to talk to more people. But eventually you want to be moving toward like, oh, okay, now we need to do this with product. And I shared in the doc that's linked in the previous slide some examples of just like what key takeaways could look like for your team. So that's key, I think. Like this is actually the most important part. It's great to run like perfect interviews and like have fun and make people feel happy. But like most important is that you get useful information out of them that you can share with your team and learn from and then go do stuff with. And that's it for the portfolio. I'm just gonna like kind of tab through the rest of these. So these are some general resources. These are all just like things on the internet that are free. So there's a podcast here that I like, some newsletters, and there's a link here to CMU has an annual product conference that they call Product Camp. It's just one day. It's either free or like 25 bucks. I can't remember. And they don't have information up for this year yet. It's usually in September, but that can be like a great place to kind of go and see, you know, what product managers are like and what they talk about. Some additional resources in terms of skill sets are here. And then, yeah, this is my stuff. If you want to connect, please do. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Awesome. Thanks. We have some suggestions. Product Tank and the Product Group are a couple of other resources that are pretty great from Adrian.
Awesome.
Nice. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up? We have about 5 minutes left before we send off. So Sydney is asking, with a schedule as busy as yours, how do you keep everything organized? Do you have any tips or tricks? Yes, please.
I have so many tips and tricks. Yeah. So, I mean, this is like ever evolving for me. So I try to keep my inbox like not super messy. My work inbox, my personal inbox is a disaster. But my work inbox, I try to keep like, you know, to a list about this long. And I do last in, first out. If anybody's heard of that, like the last one you get in, that's the first one you respond to. That helps me. Our CEO was talking about all of his crazy email folders today, and I was like, oh no. But you know, different people do different things. So one thing is keeping my email sane. We were in Asana, and I have now successfully migrated a ton of our product processes into Asana. It was a huge task, but we are like in there and living in there now. And so I kind of live in Asana land and use Asana tools to help track that. And they've got, I just figured out the other day, this like great inbox feature where I can sort of see all the things anybody says about any of my stuff and go through and archive them as I read them. And so that's something I come back to like multiple times throughout the day. I also do things like this, which is a little horrifying. But for me, there are all these like tiny things that just will fall through the cracks, and they're not big enough for me to like make a whole task in Asana, but they're things like, I don't know, some of these are big because sometimes I want to write down my big things too, but like I have to fill out a Google Play Accelerator form, and I have to write back to somebody who wrote to our job emails, just like little things like that. And so like I do this throughout the week, and at the end of the week, I'm like, I gotta get all these things done. And so usually on Friday, I have a little flurry of like wipe the slate clean in the notebook and get all that done. Those are the main pieces. It's not perfect, but it sort of works.
We got another one here, Kelly. Can you compare your experience as a CEO to your PM experience?
Yeah. Okay, so the first product management talk I ever went to, at the very beginning, this guy, his name is Dan Olson, he wrote this like lean product playbook book. He said, he's like, do you guys know the Spider-Man mantra or whatever? I don't know if it's the mantra, the motto. With great power comes great responsibility. For a PM, it's the opposite. With great responsibility comes no power. So that's the main difference. Like I'm responsible for a ton of things, but I don't have any real power. I don't like actually manage any, you know, nobody's reporting to me. Like I'm not Shawnee's boss. I can't really tell her what to do. I just have to like get her to do stuff I want her to. And that's true for like, you know, the CST, the client success people and the sales people. Like if I need things from people, I have to like go ask and like get them on my side to do stuff for me. And I need people to do stuff for me all the time. So it's really, in some ways it's like just politically different. If you think about like the politics of a small social thing, like I'm not the boss really of anybody. And so it's all about like just being someone that people want to support. But also there are things I like about not having that power too. So I really love not being responsible for whether or not people get paid. Like that was a thing that was a huge stressor for me as an entrepreneur and a CEO. And that's not really my job anymore. Like, yes, I am responsible for helping our products succeed, but that just, it's like a level removed in terms of like keeping the lights on and like making sure people's health insurance doesn't get canceled. So the existential dread is like lower in the room. Yeah.
So would you say perhaps that being a PM is less stressful, is what Erica's follow-up question is?
Yeah, it is for me. It honestly is for me. And part of that is because I got really good at managing stress as a CEO. Like I had to learn to just like turn it off. And now the like level of what my worries are just feels a little, again, it's like less on that existential level. And so it's easier still to turn off. And I've had like 6 years of practice turning it off.
Awesome. Well, speaking of turning things off, I'm going to draw some boundaries for you and do a hard stop at 7. So thank you guys all so much for attending and some really great questions. I think we can all say that we've learned a lot from you, Kelly. Thank you so much. And thanks for being my fearless leader and not thinking I was a psycho when I was like fangirling you. Because now I get to work for you. Yay!
Yay!
So I will see you bright and early tomorrow. And of course, as with any of our workshops, if you have any questions and you want to direct them to us, you can email us at hi@witpgh.org. You can check out our future events coming up. We're going to be having presentations from some of our Hacking Barriers cohort members. They've been learning to code over the past 6 months and going through a variety of workshops as well. So, our job here is to change the face of tech, literally, and make sure that we are encouraging digital literacy along the way. So that's what we do at WITPGH. And if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, helpful hints, money, also, if you have money and you want to give it to us, that would be awesome. Smash the donate button at witpgh.org. And yeah, we love you. So have a great night and yeah, eat some food. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.